This is Coach DeMarco with Get Better Basketball Live. And today my guest is Kyle Elmendorf from Lead 'em Up. Kyle is going to talk about the qualities of a great coach, and in particular, 8 traits that great coaches possess. I'm really excited to talk to Kyle today. And another Get Better Basketball Live is up next. Hi, everyone. This is Coach DeMarco with another Get Better Basketball Live, and Kyle Elmendorf of Lead 'em Up is my guest today. How are you doing today, Kyle?
Doing great, Coach. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I really appreciate you joining us again. The first time we had a chance to talk, it was a really big success, and I know that today you're going to talk about the qualities of a great coach, and that's something I'm really excited to learn about as someone who's coached for a lot of years. So can you just tell us a little bit about this topic and why you're passionate about it?
Yeah, definitely. I think the idea came, I wrote a blog a few years back on the topic, and then it kind of grew over the years, but really even before that, going into coaching, I was always drawn to, wanting to be the best. But that definition for me, it changed over the years. Yeah, I think when you first start off, a lot of that, people will look at wins and losses or championships as the sole indicator of a great coach, when the more you get through the profession and the more you're involved in it, you realize there's so much more to it. And so I think that's kind of where the original idea came from, was maybe speaking to my younger self or trying to put something out there for young coaches that would really be of impact for them.
That's awesome. And I feel like there's a lot of, young coaches, but even experienced coaches who are going to be able to get something out of this presentation today that you're going to take us through. So just a little bit of perspective on this. What are some of the topics or themes that you're going to talk about today?
We're going to dive into 8 topics or themes here. And a lot of them are going to be, we're going to first start with legacy here. We're going to talk into the player-coach relationship, player-staff relationship, and then kind of getting a little bit deeper into that is, what does that really look like when you get into the program level? What are some takeaways, some best practices coaches can put into place? And then ultimately, what's the biggest reason why we're in this, and why do we need to keep those things at the front of our mind? So like you said, I think, whether you're an experienced coach or one that's just starting off, we're going to touch on 8 topics that I think will really be of value to maybe have you reflect on what you're doing as a coach and how you can maybe enhance that.
And what I love about what you do, Kyle, when you share with us, from the first time you shared, is that you share these topics and sort of these themes, but then you give us kind of a deep dive into each one, and you give us specific examples. And that's something that I really appreciate, and I know coaches will appreciate as well. So why don't we jump into the first topic here, because I'm excited to get this going.
Sure, absolutely. Getting into the first topic here is leading with the heart. And my all-time favorite coach in any sport is Coach Wooden. And I don't know why. I think maybe it has to do with my dad would always tell me about him and gave me some of his books when he was, when I was growing up. But I've always read everything I could about him. And everything that I've read and everything that I've heard is he was really someone that led with the heart, by the way that he treated his players, the way that he interacted with people around campuses. And really kind of goes to these 3 things here is he looked to serve others first. And I think any great coach, that's what they look to do first. And, sometimes you can fall into the trap of it being about you because you're the head coach. And a lot of us, me, when I was younger, I wanted to be a head coach. And because of the title and maybe the prestige and things like that. But really, when you get into that role, I think you should look to serve first, and you realize the value of that. And the advice maybe for someone starting that's just getting into it is, even before you're in the head coaching role, is to act like you're one and to seek that, servant mentality here. So leading with the heart, what does that look like? I think it looks like you make everyone feel valued. if we're talking the basketball coaches here, I would think that, that's the manager. It's the person keeping the scorebook. Might be someone that, plays the full, time in a game, or become someone that's in there for 2-3 minutes. But everyone feels valued to be a part of that team. And then the third point here is one of my favorite things that I've heard this past year. And when I think about heart, this speaks to it, is in any type of interaction, be more interested than interesting. And that's a piece of advice that I go back and give my younger self there too, is because I was always, and my wife would attest to it, is I would interrupt people, not because I was, arrogant or rude, even though I realized it could have came off that way, but that I wanted to share what I knew. And sometimes I can think back to that as a coach, to where I would talk to a player wanting to share with them what I know in order to help them out. But really, they're just looking to be heard and to be understood first before they're going to hear anything I had to say. So now I really try to make that a habit here, is be more interested than interesting.
Coach, just a couple of points here. You're making so many great points already. We're only on the first topic, but the wins and losses piece, I think of, I had a really challenging season, and I kind of hung my hat on, having successful seasons, and then had a season where I only had a couple of wins, and I started to really look in the mirror. And actually, I look back at that now, to your point, that was probably one of my most successful seasons. I had a really young team, and, we developed as a group over the next couple of years. And I had to really kind of change some of the things I was doing as a coach, X's and O's wise, and with the group. And so I thought that was really nice to hear that, and, hearing it from you. And I think all coaches go through that type of season. Roy Williams had that year this year with North Carolina. I think Muffet McGraw at Notre Dame, women's coach, had a tough year. So it's it happens to everybody, and it's probably is your best coaching that you do in those types of situations. Just thinking about leading with your heart, and that kind of serving players, making everyone feel valued. For coaches who are up and coming, I feel like this is sort of like a rite of passage. It takes a couple of years to kind of develop these skills. Do you have any advice for those coaches that are, new to the game and new to coaching, like you and I were once? And, I was that guy who was always trying to prove my point and show people that I knew a lot and I had knowledge of the game. And what advice do you have for those coaches that are kind of just getting started?
It's a great question. Again, if I could go back to my younger self, and what I would tell to younger coaches now is ask a lot of questions, and be really, when you're asking those questions, is really be mindful and intentional with what you want to get out of it. And the other thing that I think that I maybe didn't really realize until I was, like you said, maybe 3-4 years in, is that everything is a teachable opportunity, and every experience is a teachable experience. And the people that are around you, you may look at as, a role model, or you may look at something that they do and realize that's not what you want to do, but it doesn't have to be an ideal or a great situation for you to learn from it. And, some of that early in my career, I would go back and tell myself there is like, maybe write down what you would do differently and why you would do it differently, and make it more of a learning and growth opportunity than something that you maybe just don't agree with. So that would be the biggest thing that I think you can do when you're early in the career, is ask a lot of questions, but then realize that everything is there to teach you something, good and bad.
That's awesome, Coach. And I always appreciate how reflective you are. And when you give that feedback, coaches asking those questions, but also really reflecting on, their experience and what's happening around them. So as we look at, leading with the heart, are there any other components to this?
Yeah, right here, I think there's a couple things that we have to do when it comes to that. Is we kind of alluded to defining your own success. So, really, to me, that definition of success goes back to Coach Wooden, but doing the best that you can with what you have in that moment. And really, that I think as a coach, your biggest bar of success that you can measure against is your ceiling. Now, you may have a team like you alluded to, you and I had in our careers where we had young teams and the ceiling was maybe 6, 7 wins. If you can get to that and realize that, that is as good as winning a state championship. And I think that's what, again, another thing I would tell myself early on is people who might win a state championship, usually they're pretty blessed with talent. And it does take a lot of great coaching to get a team like that over the hump. But just because you might not have as talented of players doesn't mean you're doing any less of a job in your coaching ability. So another aspect is just pouring in daily. And it kind of goes to that picture there that's on the screen. We use this in our social channels here and lead them up, but, bamboo. Coach, do you know how long it takes bamboo to grow?
I do not know how long it takes bamboo to grow, but now I'm interested to hear how long it does.
So from my research and my understanding, I don't have this planted in my yard or anything like that because once it grows, it grows like wildfire. But from the time a seedling takes root in the soil, it's anywhere from 4 to 5 years for it to really break the ground and start growing above that. So think about that with the players in your program is, a lot of times people might say, well, we want players who are leaders when they're seniors. And coaches will say, well, I don't have the senior leadership this year. Well, what did you do when they were in 8th grade? What did you do when they were freshmen? And what did you do throughout that? So make it a daily thing. When we say prepare for each season, it's not just like the upcoming basketball season, but as a coach, there's really 4 seasons within that season. So preparing for each season, as a coach here, especially when we speak in basketball terms, there's really 4 seasons. And so when we look at that, there's the end season, which obviously is the one that gets the most attention. But once your last game is over, you kind of have the postseason, which is, your ceremonies, your banquets, collecting the gear, exit interviews, all of that. That takes a lot of time and energy. That's really another month once the last game is over. Then you've got the off season, so your summer conditioning, summer camps, all of that. And then there's preseason right before you get into it. So when you're leading with the heart, it's really putting the time and preparation into each one of those 4 seasons that they deserve, not just the game part of it. And then the one constant with leading with the heart is our leadership as a coach. And again, you don't have to be a head coach. You could be a lower level assistant. You could be a varsity assistant. You could be a middle school coach. Your leadership is the constant for the team in any capacity. And all of us, as coaches have a lane to lead in for sure.
Coach, when you talk about defining your own success, I feel like this is something a lot of coaches struggle with and also teams struggle with because you want to compare yourself to the team that wins the state championship, or if you're a coach, you want to compare yourself to, a coach who has, Brad Stevens or a Shaka Smart or a Roy Williams. And what could you say to coaches who are out there, to help them really define their own success, or maybe just in general a team that's kind of going through that journey? That is kind of it's so easy, especially now, to compare yourself to these other teams. And I think that's a challenge for a lot of people. So do you have any advice for coaches or teams that, have that issue with maybe they're always trying to compare and want to be like that other team or that other coach?
Definitely. I lived it. We're in a really tough conference, and the top crosstown rival had a great program, and, they had some great players. And really what I was at that point too, and I'd look at it and be like, man, we're just not measuring up. We can't seem to get over the hump with them. But when you look at, player for player across the board, and our coaches would have these conversations, do we feel like we're absolutely getting the best out of the players that we have? And if you can say that when you look in the mirror and you have those internal conversations, then you're doing that. You're having success. And that's kind of why the ultimate definition, I think, is doing the best with what you have on a daily basis. And you'll start to hear those comments from other coaches when you talk to them. You're like, man, you really do a good job, or you're really getting the most out of your team. And when you have those feelings as a coach to where you win a game and you didn't play well and it feels like you lost. And you might have lost a game but played incredibly well, and you rose to the challenge, and it feels, even though that you lost, that it was almost in a win in a way. So I think, if you're a coach and you can look at your players, and if you're a player and you can look at your team and realize that you did the absolute best that you could, and you met your ceiling and you rose to the level that you weren't at before, then that's success in my book. It doesn't matter really, if you won or lost at the end of the day. If you can walk out of there knowing that you did that, you're a success.
I appreciate that, Coach. I think there's a lot of good points in there for coaches at all levels. And like I said, I think that's something we all struggle with at times, is really looking at other teams or other coaches and how to kind of, compare ourselves to them at times.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
I'm seeing relationships up here next, and that was actually what I was going to say, is a lot of that, feels like it's based around developing those strong relationships and how you work, within the team, and how you get to know the players, and how you work, collaboratively as a group.
Absolutely. I think, the part here obviously is we know that you can't do it alone. So it's all about relationships. One of the things that we'll say and lead them up and is, people will ask, or a player might ask, or a coach, why are you so heavy and why do you emphasize so much connection and relationship? Well, when you look at sports, it's dependent on that, right? You can't go out there and do it alone. You need other people. And when you get out into the workforce, no matter what you're doing, you can't do that alone either. You have to be able to work well with others. So sports is the perfect platform to teach young people how to build those relationships. And we have to model that. So, as a coach, I think early can happen when these kids are at your summer camps. You have to have summer camps. When you're not in a pandemic, you have to have them, because what starts to happen is each year that kid comes back and you start to develop a rapport with them. And then by the time they get to middle school, you see them a little bit more. And then by high school, you have that person that is in your program now that was coming to your camp when she was in third grade. And so that's when, you can really start to develop those. And then the depth just goes to, it's more beyond just the player-coach relationship. It's really getting into who they are as a person, what their interests are, and getting to know like their family background, history, and talking to everyone on a daily basis away from just the sport itself, having those hallway interactions.
It seems like you started to get into this, Coach, a little bit, but every coach has that really, really challenging player at some point during their career, maybe more than once. I can attest to having it more than once. That it's tough to connect with. So in terms of building relationships with a player who might be a little bit more closed in and not offering up as much, do you have any advice for coaches, in order to do that?
Yeah, kind of to the point that's up here right now is know their story. But before you can know their story, they need to know your story. So I think one of the good things that you can do as a coach is, we can come off as maybe preaching down towards our athletes, our students sometimes, and talking at them rather than with them. So one of the things that I think could really help is when a situation arises is addressing it and talking about it and sharing your pain and struggle that you went through it, because we've all probably faced something that was similar. So when you tell them of a mistake that you made, no matter what, your credibility goes up with them. Because a lot of times we think it's the opposite, that if we do show, a weakness or a fault, that they won't believe us, or now they're not going to listen to what we have to say. But kind of the opposite is true, because they see us lowering our guard and they see the human side of me as a coach. Once they do that, now I can get to know their story, because they're going to open up more. And I can start to ask questions that are going to help me understand why are they acting that way, maybe why they're closed off, or what can I do to help them out. So I think that kind of goes with being a mentor, right? Is you do that as the coach, and the player sees that, and then they replicate that. right? And you see that reciprocity throughout the program. So that's one of the things that we really pride ourselves in Lead 'em Up is when we take our teams and when coaches take their teams through our curriculum, they go through an exercise. If someone didn't see our first session that we did, but the six, we kind of talked about that. But taking someone underneath your wings, having them as a mentor within your own team really helps that team now become player-led. A couple other things up here is just provide growth opportunities. So I think this one, we didn't talk about it yet, but this goes for your assistant coaches more than just players. And if you're an assistant coach, I would ask that you become an advocate for yourself to have growth opportunities. So this is just me personally. I know people have different styles and preferences, but I was very fortunate to have a head coach in basketball that when I started as the JV coach for him, he let me coach the team. He let me run practices. And I got to run that JV team as my own mini program within the program itself. And that really helped me grow as a coach. He didn't sit on the sideline during games. And I've seen it before, and I, in my own head was questioning it of like, I wouldn't do that. Maybe they have their own reason, but if the head coach is sitting there during a freshman game and calling the defensive coverages or calling the offensive sets, how is that helping your assistant coaches grow? And it's kind of the thing is I don't know, maybe in my head, I'd look at it as like someone not wanting the spotlight to be taken away from them. People want them to know that they're in charge of the program. But really, you're going to be seen as someone that is more of a leader and has more influence in the program, and you'll develop more loyalty from your assistants if you give them growth opportunities. The same things goes for players is giving them a voice, not just saying, which drill do you want to do, but actually bringing up a situation and say, how should this be handled? And really talking open and honestly with them, I think really goes a long way for that kind of family feel and atmosphere to come into a program.
I come from the same kind of philosophy in terms of as a head coach. I think one of the greatest roles that we have aside of everything we do with the team and the players is how we can really mentor some of those coaches that are working with us. And if your JV coach or assistant coach goes on to be a head coach down the line, I feel like that's a really important thing that we can do and how we can support and help others. And I know with you mentioned Lead 'em Up, and I know that, and we talked a lot about leadership and player leadership. Are there any other aspects within the Lead 'em Up where you kind of help coaches to develop their own capacity or help them in terms of mentoring other coaches? You alluded to it a little bit here with providing growth opportunities. Is there some of that built into Lead 'em Up, or is it just specific to player development?
Well, I mean, we are geared more towards the players, but I think the great value in going through that as a coach is the coaches actually participate in the exercises that we have. And I think that's one of the things that we really encourage our coaches to do is to go through that with their assistants or go through that with the other coaches in the program. And, one of the things that we're starting to see is now, we're having people in the corporate space reach out to us, and we've got the same concepts that we're teaching players that are now applying to the business world. And so I think coaches are, obviously coaches are pretty smart, and they see that and they draw those parallels. And I think when, for me personally, when I would go through Lead 'em Up with my team, it helped me be a better actual teacher within my department or in my building. Because I started to take those things that I was telling my players to do and then put that into my perspective as now the employee to how I can apply that to my role there. So, it's not overtly intentional, but I think that's a byproduct of going through it.
Yeah, I mean, just hearing the things that you're sharing today or that you've shared in the past, I feel like it's about working in teams and having that leaders within teams and how to collaborate and communicate and really work well together. So, no, I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah. And so this is just kind of really, again, I put this up here just to kind of encourage coaches, at whatever stage in your career is to have the face-to-face communication. And if you're fortunate enough to work in the building that you're coaching in, is to be visible in the hallways. I would always, and I still do it today, to where when there's passing time or an opportunity to be out in the hallway, is seek players out and talk to them, rather than just like practice for the game, but build the connection and rapport there. So, we are lifelines of communication, and don't rely on text, don't rely on the group me or, sending out social media messages, but make sure you find time to connect face to face with people. And, one of our exercises, touch points, really kind of talks to that. Every single day, making face to face personal contact with each player that you're going to interact with. So the third,
you work with, you made a good point. For a long time, I coached and taught in the same district. And then at the end of sort of my, I guess I'm still coaching and working with players, player development, but, team coaching, which I'm not currently doing. I was working with outside of my district. So, I was teaching in one district and I'm coaching in another district.
mm-hmm.
Do you have advice for people who are doing that? I know there was some benefits in that, and there's obviously some challenges because you're not seeing the kids in the hallway and you're not interacting with them every day. So do you have any advice for coaches who might work in a separate district from where they're coaching?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing there would be, when possible, show up early and then definitely stay late, and make it a focal point of each session that you have to really then, once practice is over, to be personable, to be relatable, and kind of let your guard down and focus on, if you didn't have the opportunity right before practice started because you're going from one building to another, is make it a point to maybe end practice, 5 minutes early, or just, make it a habit early on so the players know that when practice is over, coach is going to come over to me, give me a fist bump, dap up, whatever the case may be. But, just do that and be intentional with it. And then, at any time that's away from the court, is really go out of your way to just talk with them and have that connection.
That's great insight. So we have leading with your heart and we have relationships. And what's the next piece?
Yeah, next one I think is, to be a great coach, you have to learn from the greats, right? And it's not reinventing the wheel, but realizing that there's so much that's out there. And we kind of talked about that earlier, is mentors are everywhere, right? And one of the great things about the time that we live in is your mentors could come from coaches that you work directly with. It could be people that you coach against and you build a rapport and a connection with. And it could be from podcasts. It could be from books. It could be from YouTube. It could be from Twitter. Relationships can be built there. And so I think that's one of the things that you should really focus on, is try to be intentional with that. And then, it kind of speaks to, don't be too proud. I think that can be a trap that, maybe early success in a career can lead to, is that, well, we're good. And sometimes we hear that a lot, is if, we talk to a coach about improving, or maybe what, the program could do to be better. Well, we're pretty good where we're at right now, but don't fall into the trap of good. Try to push yourself to be great. So sometimes pride can get in the way of that just a little bit sometimes. So with that, next kind of thing here, a couple takeaways. What you can do is attend conferences. And right now there's a lot on the virtual space that's out there. But one of my favorite things to do as a coach each year was to attend our state coaches clinic a couple weeks before the season would start. And then in the off season, go up to a clinic. I remember one year going to a Coaching U conference in Indianapolis and making the trip up there for that. So really just utilizing that. And one of the things that would always inspire me is finding the coaches that you could tell, or you knew, that had been in it for 30 years, and you would see them in the first row taking notes on every speaker. Now, you're not going to implement everything that comes up, but they're a sponge and they're wanting to learn. So experiment with ideas that are out there. What works, keep it. What doesn't, throw it out. And then ultimately it's, as you know, Coach, each team is different. So do what's best for your players that year. and always put that at the core of your coaching philosophy and your program. And John Calipari, I know a lot of people like him, don't like him, but he's a really good example of doing what's best for the players in his program. So I look at him where he's got these great players that come in, and he knows that he could probably get some more, but when the advice is there, is do what's best for them. If you watch the Last Dance series that just came out, I remember Michael Jordan talking about how he was maybe going to come back for another year at UNC. But Dean Smith told him, no, you're crazy. You need to go pro. So that's what great coaches do, right? They do what's best for the players more than what's best for maybe their own selfish interest in the program at that time.
So Kyle, I don't know if you're going to get into this or not in this particular presentation, but as you learn from the great ones and you sort of take pieces from these different coaches, we talked about this earlier, sort of developing, your own skill set and who you are and your own identity. How do you then transition to be one of those coaches who then starts to share the game with others? I know that was a big step for me. I do that a lot now on social media, and there's times, I'm being honest, that you think about that and say, who really wants to hear from me? When I was getting started out, I have a skill set and I've learned a lot about the game. So how do you encourage coaches to then, they develop their identity, but then sort of take that next step where they're also sharing the game with others and taking on more of that leadership role?
What I would encourage, and this is where, again, we're on a time crunch as a coach. Being a high school teacher, maybe you teach at the collegiate level, but then you coach, is I don't have time for this. Here's what I would do is to share your voice and your story is if you don't have your own social media handle, and I know a lot of coaches run one for their program, is just simply start one for yourself and start putting out what you believe in and sharing things that you believe in and have that out there. Don't leave it to chance, because people, nowadays when you hear about someone, the first thing you're going to do is go look for them on Twitter or Instagram and see what they're putting out, or you're going to do a Google search. So when we talk about hosting a podcast or starting a blog, someone might not have the time or the resources to do that. I would say go to your comm arts teacher, or go to your, maybe it's the media teacher or someone like that in your building, and ask them if there's a student that needs a project idea, or if someone's that wants to intern, and find a student that has interest in doing that and just have them meet with you and do an interview. They can take that interview and turn it into a podcast. Or you can turn it into a weekly coaches show that you put out on YouTube for your school. You talk about great publicity that you'd be able to have for your program and the school community. And then maybe, you have them dictate that into a blog and you put that out there as well. So I would encourage you as a coach, anybody that's out there at any level of their careers, you have to celebrate your program and your players. And you have to be a voice and an advocate for that, because if you're not, then someone else is going to write that story for you. So take control of that and utilize the resources in your building to where you might have a student that can intern for you and do that if you don't have time for yourself.
Kyle, as I'm seeing a lot of great ideas here. Share your story, a blog, podcast, social media. And I think about some of the great coaches out there. For me, I always loved Shaka Smart when he was at VCU and he went to Texas, and there was a lot of questions as to whether his system would work. I think of Virginia when they lose in the first round of the NCAA tournament. Their pack line, their offense isn't explosive enough. They go on to win an NCAA championship. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of belief that goes into that. And when you're putting yourself out there, you're going to get criticized maybe by coaches, or they might say, hey, I don't agree with this coach's system or that coach's system. So what advice do you have for coaches? Because I think there's a lot of credibility that comes from that. If you're sharing yourself out there, there's a lot of great high school coaches who I follow, and they put a lot of great stuff on social media, and it seems like they really believe in what they do. And as we transition here, I really love that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things where it can be shook easily. Um, but if you're constantly worried about what other people say or think, I mean, it's one of the things I think that you have to understand getting into the profession is the ability to have thick skin, because you're always going to be criticized. There's always going to be someone in the stands that knows something that you don't know, that's a better coach or can run something better. But I think it goes down to really just having it a part of your core of who you are. And so, you alluded to it with Virginia here and Tony Bennett, but the thing about that is you're a 1 seed, you lose in the first round to a 16 seed, never happened before, and the next year you come back and win a national championship. That doesn't happen by chance, right? And so when you believe in yourself, then other people are going to kind of follow suit in that. And so I think you have to have, once you've developed those convictions, is, walking that out on a daily basis and knowing that if it's been tried and tested before, then you can have confidence that's going to work. Maybe that's the craziness of what happened to them in March Madness. It could be anybody's night, anybody's day. But when you walk that out in public and private, and kind of the next slide, I think, really alludes to that on how this can happen. And it's somewhat of a pet peeve of mine, because I think it can take away, from having that opportunity, is you dog your team to other people or coaches, and then you gas your team up in person. But we need to do a little bit more and less than that. So when I say dogging to others, is you might be having a pregame conversation, and you might know that the team that you're about to play is better than you. Or maybe you're getting interviewed about the game coming up or something like that. Obviously, most people don't say it in the papers, but in conversation, it might be say, well, we don't have a chance. We're just not very good. They're going to outclass us. We just don't have any basketball players on our program this year. I would just eliminate that talk, because once you start to say it, it just starts to be in the back of your mind and how you act and how you carry yourself. And I think players pick up on that subconsciously, and that starts to permeate the locker room. So I would be more of the person that is speaking your team up to other people. If you know that they're not very good, you don't have to say, well, we're not good basketball players at all. You say, hey, we got a bunch of kids that just get after it. That are gonna leave it all on the floor. I don't know what's gonna happen. Some nights we might make our shots, we might be on, might not be. But if you speak life about your players and program when they're not around, then you're gonna do that when they're around. It just becomes a part of the program's identity. And I think that's what you look at with some of those coaches who were able to overcome that adversity, is they're not dogging their players to people. They're not dogging their program behind closed doors or anything like that. And so, I think that's one of the things we could really do on a daily basis that would help our kind of program reach the next level.
It's such a great point. And, we both brought up Tony Bennett. That Virginia story is one for the ages. And I always think about the quote from Tony Bennett. I don't know if I'm going to get it exactly correct, but after the game, he said, if you learn to use it the right way, the adversity will take you to a place that you probably couldn't have got to any other way. It's, that kind of sums it up. And, that was the belief he had in his team and the way that he approached that situation. And it's similar to what you're kind of saying with if you have a team that might not be as talented, there's a lot of ways to approach that. And if they're a hardworking group of players, I think they deserve that respect and that credibility. And there's a way to approach it. And I think Tony Bennett was a great model for that. I mean, it was probably embarrassing to lose to a 16 seed first time
Right.
ever. But then you come back, you give that quote afterwards, and you come back and win a national championship. So, and everyone was criticizing, oh, Virginia will never win a title, that pack line's not going to work, that their offense is too slow. And, then he comes back and wins a title. So that's truly belief, in your team and what you do.
Yeah, I mean, for his future players and recruits, now he's got the credibility, right? Who's going to doubt him? I'll just add in real quick is for the high school coach that's watching this, because sometimes you're in that position where, well, that would never apply to me. I'm never going to win that. I might not. I'm in a situation to where at best we're going to be 500 or a few games over. That's where, again, go back to define your own success. And so maybe it's your team is going to win the rebounding margin, or you're going to shoot a better percentage from the free throw line. You're going to have less turnovers than you did at the beginning of the season. And so when that happens, you gas your team up, right? And you talk about those small wins and celebrate it. And then I think that stacks up over time there. So kind of just real quickly leads to this, Don Shula, a great coach, but, our responsibility is to be positive. And the minute that we start, getting into that habit of being negative and allowing that to enter our practice, that's going to damage the team. So I know coaches are really, really busy, and I feel the pain because I used to teach all day long, and you have 10 minutes from the final bell to when practice starts. What I would encourage you, again, is maybe just delay 5 minutes, get dressed and sit in there for 5 minutes before you go out to practice and think about what type of energy you need to have that day, and just try to really bring that out for all that you can for that next hour and a half, 2 hours. But I think that's what Coach was talking about there is, we have a responsibility to show up in a special way each day. And when that happens, then, our team will see that and they'll kind of follow suit. So next one here is have no ego. And it's not about you, but it begins with you. And we'll try to break that statement down here, because I think, when you look at that, like, what does that mean? It's not about you, but it begins with you. And I think that's the essence of no ego. So one of my favorite people to study in the form of leadership was Abraham Lincoln. And this book, Team of Rivals, is, a classic book. I think the author was Doris Kearns Goodwin. And in essence, it just breaks down how he took all of his former political rivals, and he put them part of his cabinet. And he really sought out people that had strengths in different areas, but he won them over. And once they were a part of that cabinet and they realized they might not even been from the same political background, that they saw who he was and what was behind his leadership, they became his strongest advocates and allies. All right, and then I look at Coach Saban, and I think Coach K would fall into this in basketball. And you alluded to this earlier, Coach, about your coaching tree. One of the best things that you can look back on is former assistants that now become head coaches. And so they're not afraid to get the best and have them work on their bench. It's not going to be a shot to their ego. They're worried about getting the best people for the job and helping them advance their careers. And I think that is something that really shows if you're about that, then there's no ego. Those are some things that you're going to do. And I think those are three great examples, Coach Saban, Coach K, and Abraham Lincoln that we can kind of model off of there. And then lastly here on that point is bright lights don't need spotlights. So with that is be someone that is quick to take the blame and then share the praise. So whether or not, you could have drawn up a play, and I think we probably all had this happen at one time, is you draw up a play, you probably practice it the week before, go over it again in the huddle, you go out there and someone has a brain fart, they don't even know what they're doing. And at the end of the game, you lose by a basket or something like that, that it was Johnny's fault. But even in the locker room, don't say, Johnny, I wish you would have done that. I can't believe you didn't follow the play. We rehearsed that Overton. And I did that early on, and I realized that it kind of came off the wrong way. I probably could have handled it better with that particular player and not hurt her feelings in the moment, not realizing that. So of saying maybe after the game you would say, hey, I'll take that. That's on me. I obviously didn't have you prepared enough to go out and execute that. But then later on, have that conversation individually with a player and get their perspective, on that, or a coach's perspective on that. So, I think it all really boils down to get the best people that you can in your program that are on the same mission, and then be focused on just elevating other people up. Because once you do that enough, and you help enough people out, that's going to be reflected on you as a coach and as a person. So 6 years, have fun. This was these images that I put up here on the screen is, again, it's a long season, right? And basketball is definitely a marathon. It's not a sprint because you start in October and hopefully you're not done playing till March, maybe even April. So at a Christmas tournament, we were in Missouri, which, if you've been in Missouri in the winter, it's cold and dreary and just kind of blah for like 5 months. And so we just pretended like we were in Maui for the Maui Invitational. We all dressed up and like we were at the Maui Classic with Hawaiian shirts. We would do fun things with our teams and to kind of have them square off and take pictures. But I think you have to make it a priority. And on the next slide, we're going to go through some examples here of what you can do. But you have to get away from just on the court drills and practice and really, make it something that the kids want to be there for. Because if it's just drills and practice all the time, they're going to get burnt out. It'll help in your recruiting going forward, I believe, too. These 6 kind of activities here, we would do, and this could go for any sport really, but if we're talking basketball here, is, weight room challenges in the off season. Set personal goals, break them up into teams, and have a competition that day in the weight room. Make it fun, and whoever wins, you'll buy them, Gatorade or buy them a pizza or something like that. So if we just go down from the weights there vertically, next is a game I got introduced at a PGC camp a few years back called Continuous Cricket. And the kids absolutely loved it. And it was a lot of fun to play. And so then I took that back to our high school that year and played that with our team, and they loved it too. So one day I just surprised them and came out in practice and said, hey, today we're just playing continuous cricket. And, the next day you have a more energized practice after you do stuff like that. That kind of breaks up the monotony of the season there. We would have volleyball tournaments in the summertime, going to camps. We would break up into teams and have tournaments there, ping pong tournaments, softball games where you can get parents involved. I think that would be a great idea to make it fun. And then the last one down there, I put kind of a maze, but what became one of the highlights for the year is we would surprise the team at some point in the season where we knew it was kind of in the middle of the season and we had a stretch of maybe 3 practices and only 2 games. But one day we would just surprise them with a scavenger hunt that we made up, and we would break the team up into smaller groups, and we would have like 8 to 10 activities that they'd have to run all over campus and complete. And then once they got done with that, we had a pizza party. And they loved it. They talked about that as one of their favorite memories in like the questionnaire that we filled out for the end of the season banquet. So, I think those are just 6 ideas that we used that really made it fun that the players really enjoyed. And the other teams would look at us. So like when we did this with our girls team, they'd be running through the gym doing stuff, and the boys would look at them and they'd ask their coach, why can't we do stuff like that? So, it doesn't have to be the whole season, but I think you can make a couple of days here or there where you can sprinkle in those activities.
I'm really happy you brought that up, Kyle, too, the have fun piece, because, I think as a younger coach, it's X's and O's, it's scouting reports and film and weight room. As the years went on, I found ways to incorporate some of these activities that you are mentioning, or maybe some different activities. And then, I even see it at the college level. I remember watching a documentary on Gonzaga men's basketball, and they do a fun thing at the end of every shoot around. They take half court shots, and it was a competition, and the coaches are in it. So we used to do knockout the day before games at the end of practice, and just little things like that. And that is a quality of a great coach, because you find ways to make it fun, because it's a game. And if you're at the high school level, even at the college level, they're kids, and there has to be some element of that, and you get away from basketball, and there's team building in that, and there's still some fun competition. So I'm really happy that you brought that point up, and that is a quality of a great coach. And I bet that's not one that comes up in a lot of lists. You hear a lot of other things, but for me, that absolutely should be one. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I think to the previous slide, I'll just go back to that last point. Said, joy and make it fun for them, make them want to come back. So how can you measure that? You talk about a great coach because you might not hear that often. How many people show up for tryouts the next year? In basketball, it's going to be different because the numbers get smaller per class as you get to senior level. But if you still have a high number of freshmen and sophomore that are coming out, they're there for a reason. They heard word of mouth, right? And then you have to make difficult decisions later on. But if you get kids that are showing up each year for tryouts, you're doing something right because kids talk, right? And if it's fun, they want to be a part of something that's fun. They want to do something that's fun with their friends, for sure. So step 7 here is express love and gratitude. And I think what do truly great coaches all have in common? It's that they absolutely love their players, and their players know that. I think Doc Rivers is a great example of that, with kind of how people respect him throughout the NBA, players that he coaches against, players that he's had before. But what you can do that I think goes a long way is we used to do a thing called Thankful Thursdays. And so each Thursday I would I would find an image on Google, and I would just copy and paste it onto a piece of paper with a little saying of, sometimes it was of water, and just be like, hey, be thankful that you only have to walk 10 feet today to get to a drinking fountain, because a lot of people in the world don't have that access. And then underneath that, I would put down, today I'm grateful to be your coach. I'm grateful that you chose to play basketball and that you're here. And then just expressing that, during practice, during your breakdowns, after a game, and not being afraid to say, I love you. I think, a lot of times that can be a hard thing to do. And coaches maybe not sure how that's going to come off to certain people, but not being being able to let your guard down, express that, I think goes a long way, and it shows a sign of greatness within you.
It's funny, Coach, you mentioned Thankful Thursday. We had Appreciation Fridays. I still do a hashtag on Twitter with that, but we did stuff within our program between players and players to teachers and so on and so forth. But we always tried to incorporate that as well. And I think you have to model that as a coach. So that's a great point. Doc Rivers is a great example. And that's something that I feel like the players I coach have taken with them. And, it's something that I feel is important too.
So yeah, love and gratitude. I think you just really have to, start early and often of saying who you are as a person is more important than you are as an athlete or a basketball player. And we've already talked about going out of your way and getting to know them, but saying that and then proving that by how you interact with them. And gratitude, it really goes a long way. And one of the things that I would say is, I'm not a big fan of putting out post-game tweets of just your 2 or 3 top scorers or the stat line there, because think about that is, what about the kid who's at the end of the bench who didn't get in, but they still showed up to practice and they gave it their all? And you say in the locker room that was a team effort, and we all, even though you didn't play, but then you put out a tweet and you're only talking about the 2 or 3 top scorers, it kind of contradicts it. So I would say always, and again, you can do individual spotlights and stuff like that. That's fine. But immediately after a game, the first thing that I would put out on social media is always talking about us and we, and speaking at the macro level. And then maybe later in the week, if there's a spotlight that you want to send a message to a different coach about a player, that's fine. But make sure that you're really going out of your way to appreciate every single person on that team and thanking them for their efforts. And I think, throughout the year, good practice would be writing handwritten notes. I would always write a Christmas card to each player on the team. I'd write them a letter 2 or 3 weeks into the season, and then right before our district playoffs start, and then one at the end of the year, a big long letter. But just simple notes thanking them for who they are and their contributions, and letting them know that you value them. And then it kind of goes to that saying there is, what we think about, we bring about. So, it kind of is, I think, the law of attraction, right? The more you speak to something, the more it's going to happen, or the more you're going to see it in your program. So I think love and gratitude go a long way to building a great program and to you becoming a great coach. I think that lastly here, as we go on to the last point, is planting seeds. And again, we talked about bamboo earlier, but just constantly pouring into your players with that, and the more that they're going to give you as a result of that. So, it's reciprocal. The more you give, the more you're going to get. And then here, the last thing to kind of go back to the very beginning, and we talked about legacy. That is the percent of high school athletes that will go on to play professionally. We're just using basketball here. 3.5% is the number or the percentage of players that will go on to play collegiately. And then the 3.5 to 4.5 is the average career length for a WNBA and NBA players, somewhere in between 3.5 and 4 years. So when you look at those numbers here, we focus so much, and we say, a friend of mine, Jason Wells, he's got a book out that I highly encourage people to check out. But Jason has a saying that is so dead on, that if we say it's more than a game, then why don't we teach more than a game? Because 100% of our athletes, they're going to go on to become parents. They're going to be people that work. They're going to be members of society that we need to have contributing, right? And so if we don't teach more than a game, who is? We can't just leave things up to chance. I think if you have someone that's under your influence, and we all have influence as a coach, it's our responsibility to teach them more than a game. I know that I've got a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old son, and when I don't coach them at some point and someone else is coaching them, I want that person to teach more than a game. Fortunately, I had someone do that to my son in soccer this year, and it was awesome because he, a lot of times, will pay more attention to what someone else is saying than what I'm saying. And so we really, I think, have to take that to heart, is we are not coaching robots. We can't just look at sets all the time and think that's going to make us successful. What's going to happen is when you do teach more than a game, and when you do pour more into your players, you're going to get better results. You're going to reach your ceiling and beyond that. And we've seen that time and again with Lead 'em Up and coaches who've used it, and talk about how when you actually teach leadership and character and teach what it means to be a good person and how to contribute to a team, then that team itself just gets better. And so we don't really believe in team building. We believe in people building. Because when you build the people, those people then are going to build your team. And so I think we have to focus on that. We can't lose sight of that because those numbers are glaring. We're caught on that. I was a head girls coach for 8 years, and I had one girl during that time that actually went on to play college. There was a couple that could have, but only one chose to. And so out of that, I probably had over 120, 150 kids go through the program that was under my influence. And so if all I taught them was basketball, I probably failed them.
So many great points in there, Coach. And I think this is such an important point. And again, I think it's one that coaches might have on their list somewhere. I think this should be up on the list where you have it, because as you mentioned, not everyone goes on to play in college. Not everyone goes on to play professional basketball. Very, very, very few people do. So if we're teaching them more than the game, I think that's a big part of being a successful coach. And I hope coaches watching this really take that to heart.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be my goal, is to come away with maybe just a little bit more conviction that, hey, I can spend a little bit more time doing that. And again, it doesn't have to be you doing it by yourself. There's people like you and I out there that are here to help coaches kind of do that. So, that's just my word of encouragement for coaches there. And so, lastly here is going back to the legacy, is trophies are going to collect dust when you or I move along. They're probably going to replace those trophies in a case and fill them with something new. And so the memories, I think, should be more of a focus than the scores, because those are the things that I carry with me the most, is being with my team, the experiences that we had as a team, the things that we went through as a program together. So, being removed from playing 20 years now, not to date myself too much, but you don't remember all the scores. I really can't even tell you any score from my senior year of basketball. I remember vaguely what our record was, but I don't remember any score from a game. And so that's the things that I think we should keep in the back of our mind as coaches here. So greatest joy for me is getting messages. And I saw a coach share this earlier tonight, to where he got a text from one of his players that he had 20 years previously, and the player just thanked him for pushing him past his comfort zone. And I think anytime that you get a note or a letter like that, or you see a player and they tell you thank you for giving them the tools to succeed in life by what you did through sport, then I think that's the greatest joy that you can have, is seeing those people come back and, give back to your program and say thank you for, what you did for them. And so, we're living in a time period right now where, you and I both know our world needs leaders. And why not use sport as a vehicle to teach those skills that we need to see? So there's just a rundown of those 8 qualities again, and coaches, if there's anything that I can send you from this list, or if you have any questions about it or want to chime in or add more or tell me if I left something out, I'd love to hear your comments, or feel free to reach out to me anytime.
Kyle, you talked a little bit about coaches teaching players more than the game as your final point. Within Lead 'em Up, I know that you guys do a lot of team building and communication, and I feel like that's a big part of teaching players more than the game, going out into the real world, how to be a leader and how to successfully communicate with others. Can you talk a little bit about Lead 'em Up and what you offer in terms of helping coaches facilitate conversations and activities that will teach players more than the game? Because I feel like that's something that you guys can really help coaches with.
Yeah, absolutely. We're geared upon, and our mission is to help coaches do those things. And we realize coaches have so much on their plate that it's hard to put that out there. It's hard to put something together yourself with the obligations of coaching and all the responsibilities that come with that. So, we do focus on relationships. We focus on communication. We have competence, and a lot of, really 8 core categories that you can see on our site. But, speaking about just relationships and communication is because in the basketball sense itself, you can't have a successful program without strong relationships or without people who can communicate. And so when coaches go through our program, what they realize and what they notice is that their players are now more equipped to be better leaders on the court. And our whole goal and kind of what our mission is when coaches realize and they see that players can develop as leaders and they just need the tools and the resources, is when they get those, they then develop those leadership skills that allow you to win and to get to the next level and to reach your ceiling. And so what we've done is we have live training, but for a lot of our coaches, they use our digital program and platform to where they log in, they get access, and we have a full curriculum of almost 30 exercises, and that grows every month to where we're hitting these core themes that teach players these skills that are needed. And then as a byproduct of that, we see teams develop special cultures. And that's one of the things that we pride ourselves in. And what we really kind of, will tell coaches is you will see your program and the culture becomes special because of the relationship, because of the communication, and because of the engagement and the enthusiasm that's infused in your players through our curriculum.
I feel like some of what's embedded in here too is, I know you work a lot with coaches in terms of teaching them to develop leaders within their program. And again, going back to sort of, really there's a couple of different points here in terms of being a great coach, but teaching more than the game, not having an ego as you're developing leadership capacity in your players. I think that can be a big part of that.
Yeah.
So is there something that you guys offer for coaches? I know that you have a couple of probably different options. Is there anything coaches could look at in the short term? I know in the past you talked about your 21-day, I believe, leadership program, which was great. I know a lot of coaches really enjoyed that. Is that something that's still available? And what about coaches that are seeing this and saying, I want to have a chance to talk to Kyle. I want to have a chance to talk to Lead 'em Up because I feel like there's a lot of value in this for our program. I would be one of those coaches. How can they communicate with you or with Lead 'em Up?
Absolutely. First we'll talk about the 21-day leadership playbook, and thank you for bringing that up because we really want to get this into as many hands as possible out there. And this kind of came out as soon as, COVID hit, we were in a situation to where, everyone was at home, and how are you going to impact players? So what we put together is we took some of our core exercises. So this is a free resource, and I'll give you the links and kind of tell you where to go to access that. But it will go through some of our core exercises and give kind of an abbreviated look at what they are. But these 21 days, you will take your team through these exercises and get kind of, some reps at what it is we do and lead them up and get a kind of a taste and a feel for what the curriculum and what the program has to offer. And so that is 100% free. And we just updated it and re-released that last week after, we had several hundred teams across the country go through that initially. And so now we've made it into something that we think is even better than it was before. And we're just excited for coaches to kind of to utilize that. And then I think in seeing that, you can see the value of what our resources are and what they can do to help your team. So you can email me directly. We can put that first slide up back here in a minute, Kyle@leademup.com, and I'll send you a direct link. Or you can go to leademup.com and click on the blog tab and then just scroll down to where you'll see this graphic for the updated 21-day leadership playbook. You'll click on that, and then I'll have a link for you to download right there for you. So either one of those is great. And again, my personal handle that you can reach me at is K_Elmendorf, and I can get you any resource that you'd like on Lead 'em Up and any information you need, and just anything that you have a question about. I'm here to help you and here to help coaches out.
Kyle, as we finish up here today, and I really appreciate you sharing some of the qualities of really being a great coach and how you kind of go beyond some of the traditional answers. And to me, these are the things that really separate the great coaches. Talking about the relationships and really teaching players more than the game and so many other points that you made today. So, what parting thoughts do you have for coaches out there who say, I want to be a great coach. I feel like I'm doing some of these things, but I'd like to take my game to the next level. I think I can do better. What advice do you have for those coaches out there who want to be the best they can be?
Yeah, that's a great question. My advice would be is just have the growth mindset and really study people that have already done what that you want to do. And again, find those in different platforms. And I would also encourage you not just studying people that coach or that are within your sport or space, but looking at people from different walks and how they've had success. Because I think sometimes you might be able to take something from an artist, whether they're a painter, musician, or you can take something from an actor. What's their mindset? And then apply that to yourself and your growth within your own profession.
Great advice. And I think about Brad Stevens going to visit Bill Belichick and go watch a Patriots practice. And, I think that says a lot about him as a coach and wanting to grow, because there's so many things you can take from other sports or even other careers, as you mentioned. Well, Kyle, I appreciate your time, everything you shared with us. Hope we can do this again. Tons of great value in this for coaches. Thank you so much for sharing this. And coaches know where to reach you if they have questions. And I think you're hopefully going to be hearing from some coaches, because this was really, really great today.
Love to. Thanks again for the opportunity, Coach. Really appreciate the time with you.
Thank you.